So I thought since I had some more to do kind of filling in values that I'd stop by and do a live stream and just hopefully the sound of the charcoal kind of going over the paper isn't maybe too distracting. And if you have any questions, just please put them into the comments and I'll see if I can address them in a meaningful way. But like I said, I'm just going to be kind of filling in some value on this one. The thing, working with compressed charcoal, the thing that I noticed, of course, is that you have always a lot of like technical, just fill in the gaps kind of drawing to do. So I spend a lot of time with like a really kind of hard, sort of compressed charcoal pencil, just dialing in on those like minute value changes. So yeah, like I said, if there's any topics that you guys are, or girls for that matter, are interested in, just let me know, and I'll kind of talk about it to the extent that I'm able to. This is, of course, the drawing I'm working on is a tutorial that I'm filming for the month of June. So June 1st on my Patreon page, this one will be available with all the other kind of tutorial content that's already there. Which, yeah, I think this one's going to be really kind of exciting. This is the fact that I'm using a very different medium than I've used before. Like most of my other tutorials are in graphite, and then this one happens to be in compressed charcoal. I think it's a medium that gives you really so much impact. I mean, the way that charcoal gets these kind of crisp blacks like so fast, it's really, really awesome. Someone's asking what kind of paper I'm using. For this drawing and really for most of my tutorials, I use a paper called Stonehenge, and it's made by a company called Legion. And I'm aware that maybe there are some minute differences in between like the texture that you can buy like at various sizes. Like I've seen some of the like 8.5 by 11 inch packs like have a much slicker surface than say what the larger like 18 by 24 inch papers will have. This is the 18 by 24 inch paper, and I've kind of stretched it over stretcher bars, so it's got a nice kind of fairly toothy surface. I mean, very smooth in some ways, but it catches the charcoal, I think, really nicely. Someone's asking if I blend. I would say that to a certain extent, I blend, but I think it's probably a commonality that you'll hear from most like drawing and painting teachers, that we'd really kind of prefer to say that we are arranging values in a way that kind of creates a transition more so than blending. And I know that maybe that like kind of sounds like it's a semantic thing, but really the difference is in the result. Probably for students there's a lot of instances of maybe over blending, which is to say, like, in order to achieve like a soft gradient like this, we'll just rub it or something until it gets to that place. This is of course not the most productive way to make a transition. What you'd like to be doing is be in control of the value that you're applying, and using that value to kind of add a sense of structure to the form that you're drawing. Now, in practice, the shape that eventually takes is one that requires, I think, a lot of study. So I think probably in the beginning, students will blend a lot. As time goes on, they'll start to arrange values a little bit more. Someone's asking if this is from a live model. This is actually not from anybody right now. What I'm doing is just today I'm just kind of filling in a lot of these values. So I don't know if you can see too clearly, but let me see if I zoom in. Right, there are these little kind of incidental kind of values in an area like this that I would like to be a little bit more even. So I'm actually just going through and kind of dialing into those little tiny areas. On their own, of course, they're not harmful, but together, like cumulatively, the more of these kind of incidental values that you have, these kind of speckles, the less you'll be able to tell like a very subtle kind of difference in values, like say the one between this section of the neck and this section of the background. I wanted to show in the slightest way how there's a value shift here, and it brings forward that edge of the neck, which is a muscle called the sternocleidomastoid that kind of runs along here. It's making up that contour, and I want to kind of show that. But if I have too much kind of incidental value variation there, I won't be able to see the very subtle value change that happens. And that kind of goes on both sides of the edge. So there's an extent to which these little dark values here also have to kind of come out. And this is where, like, all right, the difference between kind of blending and arranging values. What I'm doing right now is a very important part of kind of value arrangement, and that's kind of clarifying and unifying the value statements that I've made. That's not at all about blending. So maybe that's where I would say I feel like there's kind of a difference in the two. It's a little bit difficult to get the camera to kind of key in correctly on the values here. It's actually probably a little bit less contrasting than what it looks like on Instagram. But still there's, I think, a pretty reasonable effect in between the two. Someone's asking what kind of charcoal hardness or softness I'm using. Oh, I tapped the camera there, sorry. So if I wanted to like add kind of a dark value like the background here, I'd use this kind of softer pencil. So I've got General's charcoal pencils. This is a soft one. For filling in these little incidental values, you can't see it because it's all kind of rubbed off. Yeah, I guess that's where the label was. This is a, this should be a hard or a medium pencil. I think filling in a lot of those values, I'd kind of prefer to use like a hard pencil like this one. So there's 3 grades, I think, that General's charcoal offers you: hard, medium, and soft. Similar to what, say, Nitram offers in their Vine charcoal. And like I said, for this, I tend to want to use the hard one, just because I'm not really here like wanting to add a lot of value. I'm just wanting to kind of clarify, and a lot of times like the softer charcoal pencil will have a tendency to, like, no matter what you do, will have a tendency to add a little bit of value. Jesus Villarreal is saying that he's watching before he paints. Jesus is a fantastic artist. Really, really amazing artist. I met him, I don't know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago in Florence when he was studying there. And yeah, not many more people out there that are as talented as Jesus. Really, really amazing guy. He's down in Miami now. I think, unless I'm wrong, I think he is working with the Chiaroscuro atelier there. Someone's asking what pencil I have for the white highlight. This will probably, if you are like a drawing nerd like I am, this will probably blow your mind. But I use for that actually a 0.9 millimeter white chalk pencil. By the way, with my patrons, like on Patreon, I share all my kind of materials, I don't know, secrets, yeah? So like this white chalk is a very a brand and a blend that I've been searching for a long time, and that now I'm reaping the benefits of using. So if you're again a drawing nerd, understand that like the holy grail of white chalk is out there, right? 0.9 millimeter mechanical white chalk refills. I wonder, like, I know it was something that for me, once I kind of started searching for it, I kind of couldn't stop. You know, I was looking at all like jetpens.com and all these different kind of websites trying to find the answer to this question, that can you get white chalk for a mechanical pencil? And eventually the answer came from I thought a rather unexpected place. Someone's saying they're watching from South Africa. That's it's fantastic. I do some online teaching through my Patreon page, and there's a woman that I've been working with from South Africa. I just think it's like really awesome that I know like 10 years ago, if you wanted to like study with like atelier trained artists, you know, you had to travel to them. And I just think it's really fascinating nowadays where, you know, you're able to kind of get access or get contact with, you know, with that kind of training, kind of no matter where you are, which it's like a miracle of the social media age that we can kind of connect from that distance. And so like, yeah, I'll take all the other like crazy things about social media if it means that like people get to connect from that distance. Someone's asking again what kind of paper. This is Stonehenge, but it's stretched over stretcher bars. So also there's another thing that happens when you're stretching a paper. Of course, you have to wet the paper in order to do that. And the paper then, of course, reacts to that water, and the fibers kind of open up, and then they go back to their kind of original shape. But in that, the fibers kind of open up a little bit in the sides, or the glue that's kind of holding the fibers of the paper together. I feel like it has, I don't know, a different kind of feeling or a different surface when it kind of returns after being wetted. So the paper, like this Stonehenge paper, is probably a little bit toothier than your typical Stonehenge paper because, like I said, it's had kind of water spread over it a couple of times during the stretching process. So again, any other questions? Just throw them into the comments, and I'll take a look and see if I can answer them with any kind of clarity. Yeah. Otherwise, you know, like I said, I'm still just there's so much work to do. I think just from a technique perspective, you know. When I consider drawing, you know, so much of it, of course, is about your conception of the work. How do you think about the work? How do you develop the idea for the composition? How do you reflect on the subject? But then there's like this underpinning of technique that you just have to use to express your ideas correctly. 2 questions: what pencils? Using generals, charcoal, compressed. And then what is the key to achieve hyper-realism according to your knowledge? And how long has this piece taken so far? So several questions there. I don't actually know a lot about hyper-realism. I think that probably the type of realism that maybe the category that I fit into would have to be something a little bit more interpretive, which is to say, like, it's this will look like in the end hopefully a beautiful drawing rather than looking just you know, like a photograph of the model or something. And I just forgot, oh yeah, how long has this question taken, or how long has this drawing taken so far? It's probably about 12 hours worth of drawing on this so far. And then someone's asking if I teach online. I do teach online, and I do it through a Patreon page. And if everybody is not familiar with what that is, Patreon is a platform that allows you to subscribe for like a small amount, in my case $5 or $10, and you get new tutorial videos every month. So like this one will be a tutorial video for the month of June. But through that I also offer online teaching as well. Someone's asking, do you have any intended meaning when you create your artworks, or do you simply intend to represent the person? Well, that's a fair question. I wonder if those two things have to be separate. I think, you know, for a long time, it was my impression that, you know, as a realist painter, I needed to take that realism and use it for some like ulterior purpose in order to achieve like a sense of meaning. And I think that I was looking at that maybe in a very, what's the word? I want to say like myopic way, like in a way that was not really taking everything into account. You know, when I go into a museum and I see like a fantastic portrait by Rembrandt, I don't necessarily ask that he has done something else with his representation. I simply appreciate the joy and the beauty that he's like taken into the world. So for me, like looking at someone's face intently and studying it and translating it into a drawing, I feel like there is a lot of meaning in that. And it's not like a literary meaning in the sense it doesn't tell a narrative story, but I don't think that's the only kind of meaning. Someone is commenting here also, Stephen is an incredible teacher, definitely recommend the mentorship sessions to anyone that would want to have useful inputs to improve your work. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, so I really appreciate that. And again, like all the people that I'm working with, and I get it's so amazing to me as well. Like I work with people in like Australia, people in South Africa, you know, of course people in even New Jersey where I'm living, you know, online, and it's just so cool to me that like we can connect in that way. Whereas like, I don't know, 5 years ago, that option was not so clear. I think I missed a question there. Someone is maybe asking about the models that I use or what that is. I usually just work with professional models. I work at the Florence Academy, so I'm at a school where there's like a kind of constant rotation of models. You know, it's both convenient for me to work with them, but also it kind of keeps a kind of variety in the subject matter that I get to work with. So this is a model named Liv. She's really wonderful model, nice person, and also she has her own Instagram account. It's I think it's called A Small Woman. She's very short. So if you want to give her a follow, you can find her at A Small Woman. But again, you know, it's just nice working with people who kind of know what they're doing, they know the vibe, and they kind of know a little bit of what you're looking for. Yeah, so I have, of course, a ton of work to do on this today. I'm going to be filming more kind of tutorial content and stuff, but I think I have time for maybe another question here. Someone is asking, light and shadows are the key aspects to give depth to the portrait. Can you emphasize on how to work on darker areas? Any tips to master it? And then again, someone's asking what kind of pencil. It's a General's charcoal pencil, nothing too intense. And there's a bunch of questions coming, and I'm probably actually not going to be able to get to all of them. But someone was asking about shadows, and this is like, of course, a really important thing. And I'll give you just, in very brief, a thought that I have about it that affects most kind of students' work. Oftentimes, it's not about how dark you can push the shadows, it's about how unified the shadows can be. When you look from here through to here, you find so many values are very much the same. This is the reason really why the light of the face is popping out. These values actually are not even really that dark. So you can understand that like in order to achieve like a strong light effect, it's not just about like grinding the charcoal into the paper and getting as dark as you can. It's about organizing the values, keeping the shadows kind of unified and empty, and also keeping your light planes kind of unified and bright. This is a way that that you can achieve a very strong effect without getting to that. I think sometimes even charcoal drawings where they are deep, deep, deep blacks, maybe sometimes they're too intense. They lose for me like a little bit of subtlety, or they can lose a little bit of subtlety. It's not to say that you can't use very dark values to kind of achieve a strong effect. And I think, you know, the diversity of the way people apply values to their work is a part of what makes artwork kind of vital and interesting. So I don't mean to profess that you have to do it a certain way. The way I achieve that brightness and that light effect is from unity. I think Ayush is another artist who's watching right now. He's a student of mine in Sweden, or he studied at the Florence Academy, and I was there teaching. Really great artist as well. But listen, thank you everybody for tuning in today. This will be available for 24 hours, and then probably eventually I'll probably put it up on my Patreon page as kind of a live stream content. So if you want to find it, it's there. All right, wait, there's one final question. Someone's asking again, like how long I probably spent on a piece like this. It's between like 12 hours, maybe more. You know, the longer I've done this, of course, the more efficient I've gotten. And so it's not that it would take me 12 hours to do this when I was a student. I think it takes me 12 hours to do this now that I'm a professional. Okay, I thought I'd just take some time and actually work on this drawing that actually it's been ages since I've had the time to actually even pick it up and take a look at it. I started it quite a while back on, it's on that kind of Danish paper that I imported kind of ages ago, and I started it out, and you know, life very much got in the way, and so I had to kind of abandon it. But I just thought in this like interim moment, maybe it'd be interesting to be able to kind of work on it a little bit, what I talked to you guys about, all of the like myriad things that I have to kind of bring up. There are some questions that were on the community section of my Patreon page that I wanted to talk about, and there's just other things that like I've been working on for ages, and you know, trying to make perfect, and well, I don't know, they'll never be perfect, but at least they will maybe come into being or come into existence in not too long. So I'm really excited about like all this stuff that I want to share with you. But you know, it's so hard, by the way, just to do anything. But that's maybe a separate issue. That's maybe my problem. I need to like just dial in and get it done. But yeah, so one of the things I'll talk about tonight also is going to be like the subject of anatomy. It always kind of comes up in conversations about really figurative study, but you'd also have to say that it comes up in relationship to just the study of portraiture. Now, that's one of the things. The other thing I wanted to get to was the idea. Reese Osborne was asking about the idea of using or making like a kind of value scale. I think we've all like seen those like little kind of blocks of value, you know, and people create a gradation from the darkest to the lightest, and kind of maybe what utility that has for an artist. And it's a question that maybe doesn't have to be too in-depth, but I think it's worth answering, because there are all sorts of like exercises that are recommended for artists, and you know, of course, not all of them are maybe created equal or give an equal sense of utility. I'm usually really liberal, and I like to say that, anything that you're doing is going to provide some form of utility, in that at least you're drawing. You can't go wrong to at least draw, right? That's the baseline for any kind of improvement that you can make in your work, is that it has to kind of take place while you're working. That being said, I feel like there are some things that maybe they're a little bit kind of like busy work, or that at least they could be combined into a different kind of exercise, and that different exercise would actually maybe give you more for your time investment. So in terms of like doing a value scale, like practicing making a dark value and practicing making an even light value, the skill that's maybe trying to build up, I think, is one that is more about technique than about actually understanding values, right? And I'll explain what I mean. So values are very much about understanding a plane of value, right? And understanding that in order to create form, you need to have like a consistent application of those planes of value. If you don't have them, your drawing will appear, to a greater or lesser degree, flat. And so like you can understand that like making a gradation or making a value scale doesn't necessarily give you the practice to create, say, a value that brings out the front plane of the face versus the side plane of the face. You'll need to actually draw the figure in order to do that. That being said, exercises like the one, for instance, that I'm always talking about is like making a conceptual sphere, right? In this way, making an even value is also attached to the idea of turning form, right? And by turning form, we mean just making something look round. So in that sense, you get the idea that you're able to, not only is it to be efficient and like kill two birds with one stone, but it's to attach the ideas together, right? Very little about drawing or about painting can kind of exist in a vacuum, or as I would say, like a la carte, right? Like if you're, I don't know, everybody's probably familiar with that phrase, but if you're not, a la carte just means like one thing at a time, right? Like it's you can dine a la carte, so you have like your appetizer or your first course, your first plate, your second plate, your third plate, you have them all separate. So side note anyway, but what I mean to say is that like your drawing education, or your painting education for that matter, will exist in a more efficient way, or will come into being in a more efficient way, the more that you kind of tie together these various ideas. The idea of a light or bright effect on the lightest planes versus an effect of form. Those two things should be understood together, right? They have to function together to create a portrait that is representing like the world that we're seeing. And so why not kind of learn them together as well, so that we can kind of, understand how to apply them to the world that we're seeing, to go into our work with like a full kit of tools rather than maybe to just have one to approach the world with. The other side of that argument, which I don't want to get too relativistic about it, but the other side of the argument is that if you focus on just the one idea, it makes it simpler or easier for you to understand. A valid argument, to be sure, but one that I feel like is missing a piece, in a way that you will not ever really draw like that. You will not ever draw just one idea. You will draw things in conjunction with each other if you're making representational work. So I say that we take a little bit of self-belief and take the more complicated version of the lesson, and just accept that while it is difficult, it must be difficult. You know, if it was not difficult, then everybody would simply do it, right? So this is my my idea about the idea of a value scale. As I say, do it in practice, do it in a situation. By the way, I should say, if there are any questions while I'm here and while I'm talking about things, just please type them into the comments. Also, I'm using an external mic on this, so I just want to hope that the sound is going as it should. So if anybody feels like putting that into the comments, it would set my mind at ease that you are all able to kind of hear what I'm saying. The next thing to talk about, is a big one in a way, that anatomy, right? So there are so many like different subjects around anatomy that we can kind of use to talk about it, right? For me, I like to maybe try to keep things as simple as possible, so that, again, the very complicated and difficult nature of kind of drawing and painting can be understood as easily as possible, which, you know, that's an optimistic way to say it, but which is to say that, like, it's never really going to be simple or easy. But in terms of communication, I think we can simplify things, hopefully make them a little bit easier. Now, there's a great phrase about anatomy, and I have talked about it a little bit before in a live stream as well. And it is that you should learn anatomy very well, so that eventually you can forget it. Now, we have to unpack that and say, like, what it means, of course, is that we need to learn it in such a way that it becomes more of a second nature to us, rather than something that we are doing too overtly or too on the surface, right? For great draftsmanship, right, to draw really well or to paint really well, most of what you're doing has to be taking place on a bit of an intuitive level. And while necessarily you will have to think about certain problems and think about certain possibilities, what you don't want to be doing is spending your time thinking about rudimentary or simple things or foundational things. You'd like to be thinking about the elevated features of the work, how to expand the idea of drawing, how to make a great drawing. Eventually, that's going to be the goal, and that's going to mean that things like applying an even value, for instance, has to be something you have practiced so well that you don't even think about it. And this is at the heart of this saying about anatomy, that you should learn it so well and then forget about it. You should learn it so well so that you don't have to actively focus on it. So like when I'm looking at this portrait, and I'm thinking about the shape of the zygomatic arch and zygomatic bone, and where that highlight sits just at the bottom of the kind of ocular cavity, those are all things that hopefully, right, I can just look at the model, I can see the highlight, and without having to go through and name the bony features, that I should be able to also follow them around the head and focus on making a beautiful harmonious drawing, rather than focusing on like trying to design on the surface like an anatomical diagram of the zygomatic arch. I should be able to hopefully sensitively look at the entire scene and entire situation and integrate one of those aspects into the other, without it getting too on the nose is the phrase that I want to say. Like, and what I mean by that is just like a little bit too obvious. For me, I think a lot of drawing, or a lot of the beauty in drawing that I search for is about kind of grace and harmony, right? And these things take a kind of a sensitive and and refined approach and a sensitive and refined consideration. If your work, or if my work, let's say, if I find it too harsh and too graphic, I feel like I lose a little bit that sense of harmony that is going to kind of tie the work together. So I work very hard on my technique so that the technique never steals away that sense of harmony, that I'm able to kind of call that up without thinking. When I want a soft edge, or I want a soft and kind of vibrant highlight, I don't want that to be the thing that's kind of holding my work back. Now, by the way, I've digressed outward from the idea of like anatomy, but just to say, like, it's the same thing about that. Like, I study it so hard, so that I can again focus on the whole head. I can focus on the picture that I'm making, not on maybe just diagramming the nasal cartilages, right? It's great to go through the time in doing that, and I think that there are so many wonderful exercises that you can make in terms of like studying anatomy, and that's of course what I do with my students as well. But eventually for most of us, there will be a point of departure where we'll start to say, it's not about the diagram, it's not about the bony point itself, it's how that kind of bony point contributes to the picture as a whole. And while that does sound maybe a little bit lofty, there are going to be things about drawing and painting for which you have to sound that way a little bit. And so if it sounds very kind of grandiose, I think that is just part of the game, and I'm not worried about making things sound lofty if maybe they have to be. I mean, we want to be here making excellent work, right? Wow, that's a huge digression. Anyway, thank you everybody for listening so far. And again, if you have any questions, just put them into the comments, please, and I'll get to them. So further things in terms of like studying the head, with respect to anatomy and anatomical structure and so on, probably you're going to get the most out of your exercise if you're actually studying the skull. There are, outside of that, several other areas that could be interesting to study. In particular, the nasal cartilages are interesting in that they kind of help to show you how to kind of understand the structure of the nose. So you have these kind of central cartilages. Everything is kind of bifurcated, right? So separated down the middle. You have these central cartilages and you have this kind of wing cartilage, right? And there are other cartilages kind of filling in various gaps. Just knowing the basic structure of I think they're referred to as the greater alar cartilages. I'm sure that this being the internet, somebody can correct me if I've got that wrong. And you have these kind of wing cartilages to the right and left of that. And so studying the kind of shape and configuration of those, for me, I think was very useful in terms of just kind of being able to confront the structure and form of the nose. The ear, the naming of it, and I talked about this in my ear video that I made, that you don't necessarily have to go too deep into naming the various kind of cartilages in the ear. It can be useful too. I'm for also, when you're a student, study for study's sake is also kind of a valid exercise in the sense that if you the more that you know about something, the deeper your knowledge of it, the more that you're able to kind of communicate about it, should you actually feel the need to do that. So if the portrait is like a profile and you have the ear kind of front and center, you would like that your knowledge of the ear is deep enough that you can comment on it in a really useful way, in a way that kind of shows the merit and beauty of that form and that set of structures. Yes, so the nasal cartilages, the skull, I think, is very interesting. Understanding maybe the structures of the lips more so than actually the anatomy of the lips, which is to say they're like there's a structural pattern to the form of the lips that doesn't, I mean, of course, it necessarily has to have something to do with the anatomy, but I wouldn't say that it's so much the named anatomical features that become interesting. Sculptors, for instance, will start to understand the construction of the lips from a very abstract perspective, right? So if you think of the famous anatomist Bammes, right? Bammes. This is somebody who was looking a lot at the kind of abstract forms of the body and of the face. And I believe it's probably something close to his template for the structure of the nose that, the structure of the lips that a lot of sculptors will follow. Right, so I talked a little bit about anatomy, talked about the value scale, and those were a couple of the questions that, like I said, came up in the community section on my Patreon page, which, by the way, you know, if there are topics or things that you think are interesting, that's definitely the place to put them. It's just a tab that's going to be right next to the posts tab on my Patreon page, and you can do anything there. You can post your work and I'll comment on it. You can just post interesting articles that you found or questions that you have that you want to be talked about in the next live stream, or even features of the page that you'd like to see that that you think would be interesting. But then, all right, so there's a couple things otherwise that I also want to talk about that are maybe just more about the ongoing kind of relationship I have with creating content here. So I posted before about the idea of putting out a podcast, and I was well on my way to doing it when I decided actually I should probably do a video version of it. So whatever like the video version of a podcast is, that's the shape it's going to take. So I sat down with a colleague of mine recently, Mario Robinson, and we talked about his influences or his major influences early in his career. And I'm now like kind of editing down that video into hopefully a nice and understated kind of movie about his about our interview. Maybe movies a bridge too far. Probably it's more like I don't know, a web show or something more simple sounding than that. So that's going to come out as soon as I can manage to fix all of the little editing issues that I feel like need fixing before the world sees it, and that'll be available to you guys as soon as I can possibly do it. In addition, there's going to be some future one-time download videos, right? So coming up as soon as possible, I'm going to film a series of like kind of shorter videos that are based on mostly kind of just my teaching experience here at the Academy, right? So when I'm working with a student at the Academy, there's a lot of diagramming that goes on. So I come up to their drawing and I'm assessing the various issues in it, things that work, things that don't work. And usually to kind of convey an idea, there's a particular diagram that I use for that. Now, when I'm creating tutorials here, of course, I'm making a drawing that eventually is going to be a framed artwork. So I of course don't want to diagram kind of all over my paper in a way that would maybe compromise the aesthetic vision that I have for that drawing. So I thought I'd do some like kind of standalone videos. Probably they'll wind up being 20-30 minutes a piece, in which I kind of draw out these diagrams and then also like kind of talk about the idea that they're meant to illustrate. And then these are going to be available. I'm speaking about, of course, things in the future here, but I intend to make them available kind of as a download, right? So they won't be available to you like as just a streaming video. They'll be available as a download. So that'll be hopefully coming up, like, I don't know, maybe in a month or so. But if it doesn't come up in that month, I don't know when I'm going to do it. But hopefully, pretty soon. Yes, so that is something that's upcoming. Maybe I'll make a post about that as well. And anyway, like, I'm just kind of really excited about it because I think it's kind of a cool idea. These diagrams that I've been making for probably like 12 plus years. Also, there was somebody who asked about the lighting in my studio, which is very particular and probably a challenge to reproduce unless you have a lot of space. I have maybe ceilings in my studio that are about like, don't know, maybe 20 feet high. And I have a large fixture kind of hanging from the ceiling. So I'm actually going to take my phone off of the mount right now. And I'm going to turn it around so that you can see the lighting fixture in my studio. I think I may have done this before. But if you can see it, what it is it's a 4 foot by 8 foot, basically an artificial skylight in a sense that I have built together these 4 LED panels, had them wired together and hung them from the ceiling. And then you can see also it's quite high up. So if we kind of go down to all the way up, you can see the height of it and then also the scale of that as well. So that's then kind of lighting one whole side of my studio, and then the other side actually is really quite dark. I can eventually post the specifications on that, just so that if it's something that you're interested in pursuing, that you could build one or even buy one of the light panels. I think they're available mostly in kind of sets of 2, so it might not be easy to find where there is just one of them. But anyway, I think that they're a useful kind of contribution to really any kind of studio environment. Just in terms of like having a large light source that kind of gives you an even and kind of soft light over the artwork or the model that you're working with. If you have worked like by artificial light, you'll understand, of course, that there's a little bit of this sense that it can be, you can create harsh shadows. Like if you look at the shadows on my hand, they have relatively kind of soft edges. And that's really important actually if you're going to be kind of drawing representationally. You don't really want to have edges that are too strong. They can kind of in a way make too exaggerated a statement about like the edge between shadow and light. And for me, I feel like it always kind of comes off feeling a little bit artificial in a way that I'm not necessarily interested in. I want to be like careful to say though, like a lot of people will paint with those kind of harsh edges or draw with those harsh edges, but it's just never been a part of my aesthetic in particular. So part of my thinking when I set up the light in my studio here was, well, I need a source large enough to kind of light a little bit more around the figure, right? So that edges like this were allowed to be really quite soft. This is mostly all the time that I have for today. Oh wait, there's a question from, I think that's got to be from Nancy out in Laguna. This is this is my 0.9 millimeter white chalk pencil, and it's actually, this pencil was actually a gift from Nancy as well, so thank you there. There's a question coming in from Carlos Cruz that says, my art school doesn't focus much on core fundamentals. How do you suggest me and others deal with self-teaching? I tend to get overwhelmed with how much I need to know. Yeah, this is, Carlos, this is a question that I get really all the time. There are students that I work with. I'm sure that probably if you're a patron already, you know that I have an online kind of teaching option through my Patreon page where we will have like monthly sessions where I'll kind of work digitally on top of a student's work, and I'll kind of talk about some of the concepts that we're trying to dial into. But with that being said, like absent of that, I think that one of the really valuable things for a student when you're in an environment that maybe isn't as supportive of your ambitions, which is it's a crazy thing to say like about art school, that you could be somewhere where you're actively being discouraged from kind of working in the way that you want. But I think that really you kind of take a choice about certainly, you know, where you are in the program. If you are intent upon finishing, you know, just keep your head down and get through it. Or just to decide, like, by the way, there's a lot of educational options out there for people that want to work representationally. This wasn't the case maybe 20 years ago, but nowadays really there are tons of options. And also remember that with representational work, and that sense of like, wow, there's like so much that you feel like you need to learn. There is, but a really big part of that is actually just experience. So try to, you know, I tell my students about like, you know, drawing portraits, you know, get to 100 heads and then kind of see what you think about portraiture. It's something that students always have difficulty with, of course, because you can have all of the right ideas, but maybe not enough experience using them. And so you won't be able to maybe get as much out of them as you would like. There's another question coming in. It says, I have a client who is asking me to draw a portrait with a bad quality photo. Any advices on capturing the anatomy? Absolutely. There's an application called L'Ecorche, L'Ecorche, and it is made by an artist called Scott Eaton. And this is somebody that I really, really appreciate, like his contribution and his work. His anatomy application, let me see if I can just swing my camera around to show you. His anatomy application looks like this. And you can see that it's a kind of a zoomable application that you can kind of twist around. And it's really a great assistance in terms of just like being a kind of quick reference for kind of anatomical structure. If you are kind of working on a pose that has a kind of ambiguous lighting, or as you say, like a source photograph for your portrait that is inadequate, having something like that to rely upon, I think, can be really, really, really helpful.